He arrived in Kathmandu believing winter would be a backdrop, not a main character. Before his hospital elective began, he wanted one more trek, one more look at the peaks he had already tasted in the fall. That first journey had gone smoothly. The trail was busy, the weather polite, the lodges friendly. He came back feeling light, almost cocky, as if the mountains had shaken his hand and wished him luck. What he did not know, or did not let himself fully feel, was that autumn kindness is not a contract signed for winter. He prepared lightly this time. A rucksack instead of a full kit, a sleeping bag instead of a tent, thin layers and a single light jacket. He kept a small med kit, a towel, some books to pass the lodge nights, and not much else. The plan was modest. Follow a known route with lodges spaced like stepping stones, eat hot soup, sleep under a roof, move again at dawn. But plans assume paths, and winter has a habit of erasing paths with the same ease a sleeve erases chalk. He set off with a companion, then met another traveler along the way. They spoke in the easy shorthand of strangers on trails. Where are you headed? What did you hear? How bad is the climb? Did you see any snow? In a mountain lodge, a keeper checked the sky at dawn and said there was no snow in the forecast. Their first hour was crisp, clear and beautiful. The distant ridges were edged in silver and looked close enough to touch. Then the air thickened. Flakes began to fall, lazy at first, then heavy as coins. The world narrowed, landmarks softened, footprints filled. The map under his shirt felt suddenly like the wrong language. He and the other traveler drifted apart without meaning to, a creak between them, white noise swallowing their voices. For long minutes they shouted to locate each other. When they finally reunited, they disagreed about the next move. One said the pass could be found. The other said the storm had made the pass a myth. They stood speaking to gusts and ghosts. In the end, they split. One went on. He turned back, telling himself that turning back is not defeat, but a kind of intelligence. He retraced, or tried to. Snow kept falling. His tracks, his best compass, were being rewritten by the minute. He decided to follow water. Streams become rivers, and rivers are civilization, he thought. He moved down the gully, its walls climbing higher, the sky shrinking to a slit. The hiss of water grew louder until the sound became a roar. He reached a brink and peered over the edge. The floor had opened into nothing. A waterfall dropped away into cold air. His way forward was gone. The way back was a white riddle that no longer showed its letters. He looked up. The cliff above him was a chalkboard of ice and stone. He was not a climber. He was only a fit young man who hated wasting time. He took a breath, chose a line, and began to ascend. His gloves gripped stone packed with ice. His boots searched for purchase. Several times he hung from his hands and thought, if I slip now, the story ends in a sentence. But he made it. He pulled himself onto a shelf with a shallow overhang. It was not a cave, not a room, barely even a roof, but it was something that turned the wind a little and turned the snow aside. For the first time that day, he let himself shake. He remembered small lessons from school. Wet is a thief of heat. Dry, even cold dry, is safer than soaked. He stripped down and dried his body with the towel in his pack. He pulled on the driest clothes he had. He burrowed into his sleeping bag, tugged the hood over his head and listened to the air. The storm went on talking. It would talk all night. He shaped a plan he did not yet believe. At dawn, he would try again to find a way out. Morning made the world new and the same. The snow was deeper. His legs had to argue for every step. He chose to follow a different creek, a new hypothesis. It punished him with drifts that swallowed his shins and icy banks that threw him back the moment he tried to climb. After 2 hours, he had gone 1 kilometer. He learned a new measure of time, the time it takes to sink, to stand, to take a second breath before the third step. By afternoon, he found another rock lip and crawled beneath it. He could no longer feel his feet. Numbness is a quiet word for a loud problem. That night, he felt the low thrum of fear settle into him like a cold battery. He pulled out a small notebook and wrote a letter in case a stranger found what the snow did not. He apologized to people he loved for the arrogant steps he had taken and for the simple fact of winter. He kept his handwriting neat to give himself the illusion of control. When he closed the notebook, he felt as if he had closed something else too. The next days formed a rhythm he would come to hate and depend on. In the morning, he checked the wind, checked the sky, felt his legs, and made the same bargains. He pushed a little way, probing the edges of the white room he lived in. He memorized every boulder, every twist of dwarf pine, every outcrop that could serve as a landmark. When his legs faltered or the storm darkened the light to pewter, he retreated to the underhang. He learned the exact contour of that stone above his head. He learned how to fold himself to keep heat in, how to hold still without going rigid, how to breathe so that his chest didn't rattle. He counted breaths to slow his head. He rehearsed movements, not of climbing but of a different life. The kata he'd learned in a brightly lit dojo far from here. He could almost feel the mat beneath bare feet that were now numb and blue. One afternoon, he took off his socks to inspect the truth. The color of his toes had gone wrong and the skin felt like someone else's. He took the small scissors from his med kit and pressed the point into the side of his foot until blood welled. There was no pain, just the clinical sight of red in white. A verdict without a sentence. He stared long enough to be sure of what he already knew. The mountain was taxing his body in installments. Hunger had its own calendar. In the first days he dreamed in menus, and hearing the word soup inside his skull felt like a crime. Later the appetite receded to a grey ache. He ate snow when thirst insisted, knowing it robbed warmth even as it paid in water. He tried to scoop the cleanest layers. The taste was nothing like chewing on a subtraction. He had finished the last chocolate long ago. He learned to let the hours become thin. Reading helped, but the words sometimes slipped across each other and refused to stay where he set them. He discovered he was not alone in the most basic sense. One day an animal scream erupted from somewhere above the shelf. He bolted upright, pushed his head out from under the rock lip and saw a shrub shaking as if gripped by fists. A dark shape moved through the white, a Himalayan black bear large as a nightmare, looking down into his small world. He grabbed the only tool he had in his hand, the tiny scissors, and shouted. It was an absurd defiance, but fear rarely asks for dignity. The bear turned, breaking a line of tracks in the snow, and vanished. That night, and several nights after, he heard it moving somewhere in the grammar of the slope. The sound of a large life rearranging brush and snow became another sentence in the paragraph called danger. Far away, where the air was warm and rooms had clocks, a phone rang and a family listened to a sentence that no one wants to hear. He hadn't returned. People gathered in offices to discuss what to do next. Messages were sent, calls made, a search coordinator appointed. Teams went out on foot, only to be turned back by depth, weather, or the simple fact that winter does not broadcast its paths to strangers. A helicopter flew when windows in the storm opened, but visibility kept closing like a book. Witnesses had their fragments. Some remembered a lone trekker days earlier. Some were sure of what they had seen until they spoke longer and grew less certain. The map of the search was drawn and redrawn. A local holy man suggested a triangle on the map, the rough points of 3 known places. It sounded like faith to some and like a hunch to others. In the meantime, the logic of trail networks and weather patterns argued for a different set of coordinates. The searchers did the only wise thing. They honored both. They widened the circle and added the triangle, and resolved to test both pictures of the world. On the mountain shelf, time stretched. The young man learned that you can get used to almost anything except absence. He missed the voices of the people who loved him with a physical pang. He made bargains with himself. If he heard a helicopter, he would run into the open and wave. If he heard boots, he would whistle. If he heard nothing, he would do nothing, and let the hours pass without spending the last energy he had. One day, the wind shaped a distant chopping into something his brain recognized. He thought at first it was another trick of air. Then the shape of the sound steadied. A helicopter. He forced himself out from under the ledge, grabbed his sleeping bag, and scrambled into a small clearing. He waved the bag overhead, red long johns flashing like a flare, and shouted until his voice cracked. The aircraft circled somewhere not quite above him, and then slid away, swallowed by miles and by weather. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snow. When he crawled back into the shelter, he felt not defeated, but erased. He let himself lie still until the thought that had brought him this far returned. Just one more day, and then one more. Waiting is not surrender if it is the only move left on the board. In the search base, news filtered in. Another witness came forward, and a companion who had parted ways earlier finally checked in from a different country, confirming the last stretch they had walked together and the place where they had split. That put the puzzle pieces into a new frame. The map said the man who turned back would likely spiral into the very triangle the holy man had touched. The coordination team shifted assets, moved markers, revised probabilities. They sent the helicopter again the moment the weather allowed. His body had become a tally of deficits by the time the helicopter returned. He was thinner than he believed a man could be, and still hold the shape of himself. He had a throat infection and sores that made swallowing a calculation. He felt fevers come and go like tides. Yet when the rotor beat found the valley again, he pulled himself up, took his place in the open and waved until the world blurred. This time the aircraft lingered. It circled longer, slower, as if asking the mountain for permission. He fell to his knees from the effort. He knew he had been seen. He also knew that seeing was not saving. The landing zone was a fantasy up here. Men on foot would have to bridge the last distance. He weighed that knowledge the way you weigh numbers in a hospital corridor. 4 days on foot, 3 days, 2 days, whatever the math was. Did he have that left? He did not know. He had only one task, and it was the same task as yesterday and the day before. Do not spend what you cannot afford. He slid back under the rock, cinched the sleeping bag up to his chin, and let his mind count breaths again. When boots finally touched the snow near his shelter, he did not trust his senses. He heard voices and thought they were a new kind of wind. He whistled once, almost idly, because that is what you do when you have planned to whistle. A whistle answered. He sat up fast, dizzy with sudden hope, and called out. 2 figures appeared at the edge of the ledge, bent to look under the stone. One asked his name and country. He said yes to both. They crowded into the space with him, and the cramped chamber filled with a noise he had not heard in weeks. Laughing. One of the men called him a miracle with a kind of fierce gratitude. Another told him people did not survive this long here. He smiled crookedly because the word survive felt too big for what he had done. He had not fought the mountain and won. He had waited without quitting. They fed him carefully, the way professionals do when a body has been fasting into danger. They wrapped him, steadied him, gave him the luxury of not deciding anything for a while. In the morning, the helicopter found a way to complete the work. He was harnessed and lifted, the cliff and the ledge shrinking under him until they were only a wrinkle in the landscape. He closed his eyes, not because of fear, but because of a kind of reverence for the small place that had kept him. At the landing pad, he met the people who had been living in the tight spiral of his absence. They barely recognized him. That is what survival sometimes looks like, a returning person whose silhouette is familiar and whose face is new. He walked a few steps on his own before his legs asked him to stop pretending. He was taken to a hospital. The long repair began. Feeling returned to some places and never fully to others. The body has its own politics. He accepted this because acceptance is the currency of the second chance. In the months after, when he had the strength to speak at length, people asked him what had saved him. He answered in simple terms that disappointed those who wanted a trick. He had not hunted or built a fire from nothing or crafted a sled from branches. He had done nothing cinematic. He had only taken the smartest risks he could afford, retreated when the math of snow turned against him, and then devoted himself to the slow art of not dying, drying off even when it made him shake, eating snow carefully because it stole heat even as it gave water, counting breaths to settle the animal mind that, when panicked, burns energy like a falling match. He treated his body like a patient with a long, stubborn fever. He obeyed the rule of waiting. People also asked what mistakes he had made. He offered those more freely, because they might help someone else. He had allowed an easy autumn trek to write checks that winter could not cash. He had traveled too light for a season that demands redundancy. One lighter becomes none. One map becomes the wrong map the moment a switch puts the better one in someone else's pack. He had not built in fail-safes for separation. He had learned that comfort in the paragraph before a storm is mostly a story you tell yourself. He believed in humility afterward, a humility that says the mountain did not spare him because he earned it, and did not kill him because it was kind. The mountain, like the sea, is a place that makes its own weather and lets us walk on it when that weather allows. He lived because he found a shelf and because men and women organized a search that honored both logic and local knowledge. If you must have a miracle, let it be that. People who persist across bad odds and a person who refuses to let the cold finish the sentence. There are practical lessons that outlive the story. Do not let an easy season be your only teacher. Plan for separation, not for the fantasy that no one will get hurt or lost. Carry more fire than you think you need, and more map than one version of the truth. Recognize that the decision to turn back is sometimes the bravest move because it demands you read the world as it is, not as you hoped it would be. When your path disappears, you can make a new plan, but make sure it is a small plan you can afford. And there are human lessons which are harder. Hunger goes quiet after a while, loneliness does not. The sound of a helicopter can be both salvation and sorrow in the same minute. A rock overhang can become home when home is simply the place where you survive another night. A bear can remind you that the food chain does not care about your plans and still leave you alone as if mercy were a reflex. You can write a letter you hope no one will read, and then live long enough to be embarrassed by your neat handwriting. If you listen closely, the mountain speaks in a language that is not words. It says prepare. It says respect. It says this is not about proving courage, but about choosing wisdom. It says that sometimes the only path out is the one you take in your head while your body waits. When he finally stood in a room with heat and walls, the young man did not brag. He did not craft a saga where he beat the elements. He told a smaller and truer story. I waited under a stone and did not stop breathing. People came because other people would not stop looking. Between those two kinds of stubbornness, a life fits. The ledge still exists, just a wrinkle in a wild face. Snow still falls there, and wind still carries voices that are not quite voices. Somewhere another hiker will stand at a fork and weigh a pass against a storm and make a choice that will seem small and will not be small at all. If they choose to turn back, may they hear his quiet answer rising from that winter. Turning back is not failure. It is a way of taking yourself home.